My name is Darius Cole. I am 43 years old. I build things. Not buildings the way some men do, not towers of glass and steel that catch the morning light on the Atlanta skyline, but something quieter and harder to see. I build systems. The kind of financial infrastructure that holds companies together from the inside, the way rebar holds concrete, invisible until the day it's tested, and then suddenly the only thing that matters. I tell you that not to impress you. I tell you that because on the morning of March 14th, a Tuesday, I stood in a green room at the studios of the Brighter Morning Show, the second most watched morning talk program in the country, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, watching my wife of 11 years sit across from the show's host on a white couch under warm television lights, and I needed to remind myself of what I actually was. Because what she was about to tell 22 million people I was something very different. Jessica Cole, née Jessica Dupree, was 39 years old and the kind of beautiful that still stopped a room. High cheekbones, deep-set eyes the color of good mahogany, a voice that wrapped around a room and made people lean forward without knowing why. She had built her lifestyle brand, by Jessica, from a blog she started on our kitchen table 7 years ago into a media company with a staff of 31 and a partnership deal with one of the largest retail chains in the Southeast. She was, by every measure the world cared to count, a success story. And I had been there for every single chapter of it. The green room monitor showed her crossing her legs, smoothing her coral blazer, smiling at the host the way she smiled at cameras, wide and deliberate. The smile she practiced in our bathroom mirror on Saturday mornings while I made breakfast, and Zoe, our 9-year-old daughter, sat at the kitchen island drawing horses in her sketchpad. I had flown in from Chicago the night before. A 3-day consulting engagement for a Fortune 500 company that had gone 6 months without a CFO and needed someone to stabilize their books before the quarterly earnings call. I'd landed at 11, taken a car home, found the house dark, found the bed cold, and found a note on the kitchen counter that simply said, "Watch the show tomorrow morning. It will explain everything. I didn't sleep that night. Not 1 hour. I sat in the armchair in our bedroom with the city lights of Atlanta blinking through the curtains, reading that note one sentence over and over, trying to understand how 11 years of marriage could be compressed into 9 words on a piece of notepaper. When I got to the studio the next morning, Jessica's publicist, a young woman named Bria who had never once made eye contact with me in 3 years, told me the segment would begin at 8:45. She said it the way you tell a guest what time dinner is served. Professionally. Without warmth. Like I was simply on the schedule. I sat in that green room alone and watched the monitor. The host, Denise Lattimore, leaned forward with the practiced empathy of a woman who had perfected the art of making people feel safe enough to say the thing they had driven 40 minutes in morning traffic to say. "So, Jessica," she said, her voice dropping to the register of serious television. "You've been very private about your personal life, but you told us before the segment that today you wanted to clear the air." Jessica nodded slowly. She unfolded her hands in her lap and looked directly into the camera. Not at Denise. At the camera. At the 22 million people on the other side of it. At me. "I do," she said. "I've spent the last several months trying to do this quietly, and quietly hasn't worked. So," she drew a breath, "I am announcing today that I have filed for divorce from my husband, Darius Cole." The audience murmured. Denise's expression held its professional sympathy. I know a lot of my audience has seen Darius at events, at appearances, and I want to be honest with them the way I've always tried to be honest. Darius is a good man. She paused, and in that pause I heard something I had not expected. The careful architecture of a sentence designed to make the word but feel inevitable. But he has never really understood what I was building. He is comfortable. He is steady. And comfortable and steady stopped being enough for where I am going. Denise tilted her head. "What do you mean by that?" Jessica looked down at her hands once, then back at the camera. "I mean that I outgrew the marriage," she said. "Darius is a good man, but he is nobody in my world. He does not move in the spaces I move in. He does not dream the way I dream. And I owe it to myself, and to every woman watching who has ever felt herself shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. I owe them the truth. Nobody." The word landed in that green room the way a stone lands in still water. Everything around it rippled and went quiet. I set down the coffee cup. Very carefully. The way you set down something fragile after you've already decided it no longer belongs to you. I did not cry. I did not move. I sat with that word the way you sit with a diagnosis, giving it space to become real before you decide what to do with it. And in the silence of that green room, with the monitors still glowing and the studio audience still buzzing and my wife's face still filling the screen, something shifted in me. Not rage, not grief. Something older and quieter and far more dangerous. Clarity. Because here is the thing Jessica did not know. Here is the thing nobody in that studio knew. Nobody watching on their televisions at home. Nobody who would clip that segment and share it on social media by noon. 3 weeks before that Tuesday morning, I had received a phone call that would make everything she had just said on national television the most expensive mistake of her career. But I wasn't ready to talk about that yet. Stay with me. To understand what happened in that studio, you have to go back further. Not to the beginning of the end, but to the beginning. I met Jessica Dupree on a Wednesday evening in October, 14 years ago, at a fundraising dinner for a nonprofit that provided financial literacy programs to high school students in underserved neighborhoods in Atlanta. I had been invited by a colleague. She had been invited by a friend of a friend. We ended up at the same table because the seating had been arranged by alphabetical order of last name, and Dupree follows Cole by exactly the right number of letters. She was wearing a green dress and arguing passionately with a man twice her age about why financial literacy should begin in the 4th grade and not the 9th. She had a notepad in her lap, and she was taking actual notes on a napkin, which told me 2 things immediately. She was serious about the argument, and she hadn't planned to care this much when she walked in that evening. I leaned over after the man excused himself and said, "You're right about the 4th grade." She turned and looked at me the way people look at strangers who've been listening to a conversation they thought was private. Then, instead of being annoyed, she laughed. Short and real and nothing like the laugh she would eventually learn to use for cameras. "You were eavesdropping," she said. "I was listening," I said. "There's a difference. Eavesdroppers don't tell you when they agree with you." That was the beginning. We dated for 2 years, the good kind of 2 years where you are still discovering things. She was running a small event planning side business then, working days at a PR firm, and writing long posts on a personal blog about food and decor and the particular kind of pride that Black women of a certain age are taught to keep quiet about. She showed me the blog on our 3rd date, on a laptop balanced on her knees in a coffee shop, and I remember the way her shoulders tensed slightly as she watched my face, braced for judgment. I read 4 posts without saying anything. Then I said, "These are good, Jessica. These are really, really good." She exhaled, a breath she might have been holding for months. We were married in a small ceremony in Piedmont Park on a Saturday in June. 80 people. Zoe's grandmother sang. My father cried in the 3rd row with his hands folded in his lap, like he was praying, and maybe he was. I stood at the front of that clearing under an arch of white flowers my mother had arranged herself and watched Jessica walk toward me in a dress she had designed with a seamstress from our neighborhood, and I thought, with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been more sure of anything, I will spend the rest of my life making sure this woman never has to be afraid of being seen. That promise. I kept it. And somewhere along the way, it became the very thing that undid us. Because here is the truth about building someone's confidence when yours is quiet. They eventually stop being able to see the quiet kind. The blog became a website. The website grew an audience. The audience found sponsors. The sponsors opened doors. I covered our bills alone for 2 years while By Jessica found its footing, working 60-hour weeks as a financial consultant and freelance CFO, flying to client cities on Sunday evenings and flying home Friday nights, walking into a house that smelled like candles and content strategy and the particular industry that was growing in our kitchen while I was somewhere over Tennessee at 30,000 feet. I did not mind. I want to be clear about that. I did not mind because I believed in what she was building. I had read the early blog posts. I had seen the real thing underneath all the ambition, a woman who genuinely wanted to show other women how to be proud of themselves in the spaces they occupied. That mattered to me. It still does. What I did not see clearly enough, because I was too close to it and too tired to look up from my own work, was the slow drift happening in our marriage as her world expanded and my role in it quietly contracted. I stopped being the man who had believed in her before anyone else. I became the man who was always traveling, the man who sent money transfers instead of showing up, the man whose name appeared on insurance documents and mortgage papers, but not on the acknowledgement page of her first brand book. I noticed the acknowledgement page the day the book arrived in a UPS box. She was out at a brand photo shoot. I opened the package, turned to the front matter the way you do, the way anyone who loves someone would do, looking for the version of yourself they choose to show the world. My name was not there. She thanked her publicist. She thanked her creative director. She thanked her mother. She thanked the Atlanta community that raised me. I stood in our kitchen holding that book for a long time. Then I closed it, set it on the counter, and started dinner for Zoe. I never mentioned it. I told myself it was an oversight. I told myself that the version of love that needed acknowledgement was probably a fragile kind. I told myself a lot of things that kept me from having the conversation that might have saved us 3 years of quiet distance before everything finally broke open on a Tuesday morning under television lights. Here is what I know now that I did not let myself know then. Jessica was not a cruel person. I want to make that clear before this story goes any further, because what she did was real and it hurt and it was wrong, but it did not come from cruelty. It came from something smaller and sadder. She had learned, somewhere in the space between her mother's porch in Decatur and the stage she eventually built for herself, that visible success was the only kind that counted. That the things happening quietly, dependably, out of sight, were simply the background. The wallpaper. The furniture you stop seeing because it has always been there. I was the furniture. I want you to sit with something that took me a long time to accept. When someone stops seeing you, it is not always because they stopped caring. Sometimes it is because caring stopped feeling like enough once the world started watching. And the world, once it starts watching, has a way of rearranging your priorities without you ever choosing to let it. I watched that happen to Jessica over 7 years, and I named it loneliness in myself and said nothing to her about it. We would eat dinner across from each other, Zoe between us full of the particular nonstop energy of a child who has no idea the adults in the room are drifting. And I would look at Jessica, and she would look at her phone, and then look up and smile the way you smile when you have been somewhere else and are trying to rejoin a room without drawing attention to how long you were gone. I should have said something then. I should have said it 100 thens before the one that became too late. But here is the other truth I carry from those years, the one that sits right next to the regret and takes up just as much space. I was not innocent in the drift. I had retreated too. Into the work, into the travel schedule, into the identity of the man who held things together without needing to be held. I had made myself so reliable that I had accidentally made myself invisible. And invisible men do not get acknowledgement pages. They get assumed. We had both, I think, been waiting for the other person to close the distance. And neither of us ever did. Silence, I have since learned, is not the same thing as patience. Sometimes it is just fear wearing patience's clothing. 3 weeks before the television appearance, on a Monday afternoon in February, I was sitting in my office on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta, going through the final due diligence documents on an acquisition that had been 6 months in the making. My phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, a New York area code. I almost didn't answer it. "Mr. Cole," said the voice on the other end. A man, measured and unhurried. The voice of someone accustomed to saying important things in calm tones. "My name is Raymond Stokes. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Media Group." I knew the name. Anyone in business media knew the name. Apex Media Group was one of the largest privately held media conglomerates in the country, with a portfolio that included print, digital, broadcast, and lifestyle content brands across 12 markets. "I've been following your consulting work for the past 18 months, Stokes said, "particularly your restructuring work on the Meridian Group's financial division." "That was elegant work, Mr. Cole." "Thank you," I said carefully. "We have recently acquired a portfolio of lifestyle and media brands in the Southeast. 6 properties, including one you may be familiar with given your personal circumstances." He paused, measured. "By Jessica Media." I was quiet for 3 full seconds. "We closed the acquisition last Friday," he continued. "The brand is performing well at the content level, but the financial infrastructure is significantly underdeveloped for a company of its scale. We need someone to come in as Group CFO with full operational oversight. Someone who understands the space, understands the market, and has the discipline to build the kind of systems the company needs to grow to the next level." I kept my voice even. I had learned that skill over years of walking into rooms where other people expected me to need something from them. "You're offering me the CFO position over a portfolio that includes my wife's company," I said. "Your soon-to-be former wife?" he said, not unkindly. We are aware of the situation. It is not a concern for us. We need the best person for this role. Our research indicates that person is you. I looked out my office window at the Atlanta skyline. February light pale and thin across the buildings. I'll need to think about it, I said. Of course, said Stokes. Take 2 weeks. I took 13 days. Not because I was uncertain. I knew my answer within the first 48 hours. I took 13 days because I needed to think about what saying yes would actually mean, not just professionally, but in every dimension of a life I was already in the middle of unraveling. I thought about Zoe. I thought about what it would mean for her to watch her father walk into her mother's workplace as the person in charge. I thought about whether I was capable of doing the job with the kind of objectivity it required, or whether somewhere beneath all my professional discipline there was a wounded man looking for a stage. I sat with that question the way I sit with every question that matters. Quietly, in the early morning before the city wakes up, with coffee and honesty and no audience. What I found, when I was truly honest with myself, was this: the job was right. The qualifications were real. The need was genuine. And the fact that Jessica's company was in the portfolio was not the reason to say yes. It was simply a fact, uncomfortable and awkward, that I would have to navigate with as much integrity as I could manage. I called Raymond Stokes on day 13 and said yes. I had been in the role for 11 days when Jessica sat down on that white couch and called me nobody on national television. She did not know. She had no idea. And the particular silence I kept in the days between my acceptance call and that Tuesday morning was not cruelty. It was not strategy. It was simply the discipline of a man who had learned, across 11 years of marriage and 20 years of professional life, that the right moment to speak is rarely the first moment you have something to say. I drove home from the studio in silence. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of the city moving around me the way cities do when they are entirely indifferent to your personal situation. The house felt different when I walked in. Or maybe I felt different inside it. Zoe was at school. The housekeeper had been in. Everything was in its place, surfaces clean, the smell of lemon and something faintly floral, and yet the whole place had the quality of a stage set between performances. I stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Jessica had started by Jessica on a laptop 7 years ago, and I let the morning settle around me. My phone had 37 notifications. Messages from colleagues who had seen the clip already. A text from my mother that said simply, "Call me when you're ready. I love you." A long voice message from my older brother Marcus that I did not play all the way through because the first 30 seconds told me everything he was going to say, and I didn't have the energy for righteous anger on my behalf that morning. There was one message I read twice. From my closest friend, Theo Graves, who had known me since college and who operated from a place of such consistent calm that his opinion on things was the only one I actively sought. She said it on camera, D. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Be careful what you choose back. I folded my phone onto the counter and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard. The swing set Zoe used less and less these days was still there, slightly rusted at the joints. I had assembled it one Saturday morning 3 years ago, Zoe sitting in the grass nearby, handing me bolts one at a time like a surgical assistant, very serious about the job. "Daddy, is this one?" she had said, holding up a bolt that was clearly the wrong size. "That's a different one, baby girl." "I know," she had said, entirely unbothered. "I just wanted to check." I had laughed then. Down in the grass on my knees with an instruction manual I had stopped consulting 20 minutes in, laughing at my 9-year-old daughter's absolute confidence in her own wrong answers. Standing at the kitchen window, I thought about that laugh. How uncomplicated it had been. How far away it felt right now. I thought about all the Saturdays. All the small, unremarkable Saturdays that nobody films and nobody posts about. The ones that make up the actual weight of a marriage. The grocery runs and the dentist appointments and the evenings where nothing happened except that you were both in the same room and the television was on, and that was, somehow, enough. The 1,000 ordinary hours that people only recognize as the good ones after they are already gone. I had loved this woman. I want that on the record before anything else. Whatever was coming and whatever had already happened, I had loved Jessica Dupree with the specific, deliberate love of a man who chose it every morning and had never once made the choice lightly. That does not make what she did smaller, but it makes the story honest. I turned away from the window. I took a glass from the cabinet, filled it with water from the tap, and drank it slowly at the kitchen sink, looking at the cabinet above the stove where we kept the good dishes, the ones we had registered for at our wedding and used exactly 4 times in 11 years because we were always saving them for a special occasion that somehow kept not arriving. I made a note to myself to start using the good dishes. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. Not to read the news coverage, though there was plenty. Not to look at social media, where I could only imagine what was happening. The clip had almost certainly been shared thousands of times by now. The word nobody extracted and captioned and carried across every platform where people went to watch other people's pain from a safe distance. I was not interested in any of that. I opened a folder on my desktop that I had labeled simply Apex Transition, and I began to work. Because here is what I knew that Jessica did not know, what the cameras had not captured, what 22 million viewers had no context for. Nobody is nobody in every room. A man can be invisible in one life and essential in another, and the difference is never the man. It is always the room. I had a new room, and it was time to build something inside it. Her name was Priya Watkins, and she had been by Jessica's head of finance for 4 years. I want to tell you about Priya before I tell you about what she told me, because who she was matters as much as what she said. Priya was 36, meticulous, the kind of financial mind that sees patterns in numbers the way some people see shapes in clouds, naturally and without effort. She had joined by Jessica fresh from a corporate accounting role at a mid-sized logistics company, taken a significant pay cut because she believed in the brand, and had spent 4 years building the financial reporting systems that made the Apex acquisition possible in the first place. She was also the only person inside by Jessica who knew that the company's last 2 fiscal years had been partially financed by a silent investor who had, on paper, purchased a 22% ownership stake in the company without that fact ever being disclosed publicly or to the company's other stakeholders. The silent investor's name was Jordan Price. Jordan Price was 36 years old, the founder of a boutique creative agency in Atlanta, and he had been in Jessica's professional orbit for approximately 3 years. He had become, Priya told me carefully and without editorial comment on our first official one-on-one meeting as new CFO, something more than a professional contact in the past 18 months. Priya did not say it directly. She said it the way honest people say difficult things, through the financial record rather than through gossip. The investment structure is unusual, she said, sliding a folder across the conference table. The terms don't reflect a standard angel investment. There's no preferred return schedule, no equity conversion timeline. It's structured more like a personal loan between people who trust each other significantly. I looked at the documents. My face was still. How long have you known about this? I asked. Since the paperwork came through, she said. About 14 months ago. Why didn't you escalate it? She was quiet for a moment. I raised it once with Jessica. She told me the terms were intentional and that I should update the cap table and move on. Another pause. I updated the cap table. I didn't move on. I kept copies of everything. I looked at her across that conference table. This woman who had stayed in a role she could have left, kept records she could have destroyed, and walked into a meeting with a new CFO she had no reason to trust with the most sensitive information in the company. Why are you telling me this? I asked. She looked at me steadily. Because I've been here 4 years. I watched this company get built. I care about what it becomes. And I think whoever is in charge of its finances needs to know everything that's actually in those finances. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Priya, I said. I need you to stay in your role. Nothing changes about your day-to-day until I have a full picture. She gathered her copies of the documents and stood. At the door, she turned back. Mr. Cole, she said. I'm sorry about what happened on the show. It wasn't right. She paused. And for what it's worth, the company ran as well as it did these past several years partly because your name on the household finances gave Jessica the freedom to take risks with the business. She may not have named it, but it was real. She closed the door quietly behind her. I sat alone in that conference room on the 22nd floor for a long time after she left, looking out at the city. Below me, Atlanta hummed in its usual weekday rhythm. Cars threading through intersections, people moving with the specific purpose of a city that is always, in some corner or another, in the middle of building something. I thought about what Priya had just told me. Not about the betrayal. I had suspected something like this. The timeline of the last 18 months made a kind of painful sense when viewed from a distance. What I thought about was something smaller and quieter. The phrase she had used, the freedom to take risks. I had given Jessica that. I had been the stable ground she stood on while she reached for something higher. And she had reached so high and so far that at some point the ground itself had disappeared from her line of sight. That is not a comfort. I want to be clear about that. Understanding why something happened does not make it feel less like what it was. But it does make it easier to act from a place of clarity instead of a place of pain. And clarity, I had decided the morning I watched her call me nobody on television, was the only thing I was going to let guide me from here on out. Over the next 4 weeks, I came to work every morning at 7:15. The By Jessica offices were on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse building in West Midtown, the kind of space that communicates creativity deliberately. Exposed brick, pendant lights, a kitchen stocked with sparkling water and snacks chosen by a lifestyle consultant. The walls displayed enlarged prints of campaign shoots, staff photos, a framed copy of the brand's core values written in Jessica's handwriting and blown up to poster size. Asterisk authenticity, courage, joy, community, asterisk. I read those words every morning when I walked past them. I didn't allow myself to feel the irony of them. Irony is for people who have the luxury of standing still. I was moving. What I found in those first 4 weeks, working quietly with Priya and with the 2 analysts she trusted most, was not the criminal operation I might have feared. It was something both simpler and sadder. A company that had outgrown its financial structure at every stage, but never stopped to fix the foundation because the facade was always performing well enough to keep going. The Jordan Price investment was undisclosed, yes, but it was not necessarily illegal depending on the specific disclosure obligations Jessica had entered into with her retail partner. What it was a conflict of interest, a significant one that, combined with several other irregularities in the vendor payment records, created a picture of a company that had been run on charisma and momentum rather than discipline. I documented everything, not to build a weapon, to build a case for what the company needed in order to survive and grow under Apex's ownership. That is the job. That is what I was hired to do. But I will not pretend that every evening when I closed my laptop and drove home to the house that was slowly being divided into boxes and legal documents and custody schedules, I was only thinking about the job. Some nights I sat on the back porch with a glass of water and thought about that word. Nobody, the way it had landed in that green room. The specific quiet it had created around me. The way all the ambient noise of that studio had seemed to pull back to let the word arrive cleanly. I had been called many things in my professional life. Precise, reserved, dependable. Once, by a client who was irritated by how long I took to review a contract. Unnecessarily careful. None of those words had touched me the way that one did, because it was not said by a client or a colleague or a rival. It was said by the person who had handed me a ring at the end of an aisle in Piedmont Park and accepted one in return. It was said by the person who had fallen asleep against my shoulder on a flight to San Francisco 6 years ago, her hand loose in mine, both of us too tired to keep our eyes open. It was said in front of the largest audience she had ever commanded. That specificity matters. Not because it makes me a victim. I am not telling you this story to be pitted. I am telling you because the full weight of what she chose to do has to be on the table before any of what comes next can mean what it means. On the 23rd day after I started the role, I received an email from Jessica's attorney. It was a formal communication, professional and brief. It requested that, given my position as CFO of Apex's Southeast Lifestyle portfolio, I recuse myself from any decisions affecting By Jessica during the divorce proceedings on the grounds of conflict of interest. I read the email twice. I understood why it had been sent. From her attorney's perspective, the optics were uncomfortable at best. The estranged husband, now in a position of financial authority over his wife's company, could easily be framed as a man using professional power to settle a personal score. I had thought about this possibility before I ever accepted the role. I had sat with it at length in those 13 days between Stokes's call and my answer. I had asked myself honestly and without self-flattery whether there was any part of my motivation for taking the job that had to do with what she had done and what she had said. The honest answer was complicated. The professional case was clean and real. The financial skills required were genuinely mine. The timing was what it was, not my design and not my fault. But was some part of me aware, when I said yes, that the role would place me in her orbit in a position of authority? Yes. Some part of me was aware. I am human, and I am honest enough to say it. What I was also aware of was this: that awareness was not the same as motivation. A man can notice something and still choose to act on different grounds. The test is not whether you feel the satisfaction of a situation. The test is whether you let that feeling drive the car. I had committed from day one that it would not drive mine. I forwarded the email to Raymond Stokes with a single line: "Your thoughts?" He called me within the hour. "This is a legally ungrounded request," he said. "You were hired for this role before the divorce was announced publicly. There is no conflict of interest that affects your fiduciary duty to Apex. I'll have our legal team send a response." "I want to be careful," I said. "I want everything I do in this role to be above question." "Darius," Stokes said, and it was the first time he had used my first name. It landed with the particular weight of a man who does not use first names casually. "The reason I hired you is because you are above question. Keep working." I kept working. But I want to tell you about something that happened in that same week, because it is the part of this story I think about more than the boardroom moments or the legal filings or the things that will eventually become headlines. Zoe called me on a Thursday evening. She was at Jessica's apartment, which Jessica had moved into after the studio announcement. She was supposed to be doing homework. Instead, she was sitting in a closet. I could tell by the muffled quality of the sound. And she said, in the particular voice of a 9-year-old trying very hard to sound like the situation is manageable, "Daddy, are you okay?" I had to take a moment before I answered. The specific discipline of that moment, of not letting her hear what I was actually feeling, was the hardest thing I did in that entire period. "I'm okay, baby girl," I said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said. "I just wanted to check." She paused, and then, "Daddy, you're not nobody. You're my person." I was in my car in the parking garage of the Apex building when she said it. I sat there for 3 minutes after we hung up before I trusted myself to drive. Some things don't need to be processed out loud. Some things you just carry very carefully and let them do what they do in the quiet. On a Monday morning, 6 weeks after I accepted the role, Raymond Stokes flew in from New York for a quarterly review. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main conference room of the Apex Southeast offices, a building 3 blocks from the By Jessica warehouse. The agenda, which had been distributed to all relevant parties the previous Thursday, listed the CFO report as the 3rd item on a 9-item slate. What the agenda did not list, because Stokes and I had discussed it only in a phone call the evening before and decided to handle it directly rather than through prior notice, was the item we would be addressing before we formally closed the session. Jessica arrived at 9:58. She did not know I would be there. She had been invited as the founder and public face of By Jessica for what she had been told was a standard brand integration update with the new parent company's leadership. Her publicist was with her. Her creative director, a tall, quiet man named Marcus Webb, walked in beside her. Jordan Price was not present. He had no official standing in the company, and I had made a point, through Priya, of ensuring his access to internal systems had been quietly closed 2 weeks prior as part of a standard vendor and partner access audit. I was already seated when she walked in. The moment she saw me, something crossed her face that I had not seen very often in 11 years. Not anger. Not the composed boardroom expression she usually carried into professional settings. Something rawer and quicker than either of those. Surprise with fear underneath it. She recovered in approximately 2 seconds. I watched her do it. The settling of the shoulders. The lift of the chin. The professional smile arriving like a costume being put on with practiced speed. She took a seat across the table without speaking to me. Her publicist sat beside her. Marcus Webb sat at the end. Stokes sat at the head of the table. I sat to Stokes's right. "Good morning, everyone," Stokes said. "Let's get started." He moved efficiently through the first items. Brand performance metrics. Distribution expansion. Content calendar alignment. Jessica answered questions clearly and with the ease of someone who knows her material completely. Whatever else was true about her, she understood her brand, and she spoke about it with the kind of authority that is built from years of real work. I listened and said nothing. When Stokes got to the finance portion, he nodded to me. I had a presentation prepared. Clean. Fact-based. No editorial framing. No language designed to land hard. Just numbers and structures, and the specific picture they created when you laid them next to each other. I walked through the financial health of the company without looking at Jessica. I looked at Stokes. I looked at Marcus Webb, whose face told me he was hearing some of this for the first time. I looked at the screen behind me where the charts were projected. When I got to the slide covering the investment structure and the undisclosed 22% stake, Jessica's publicist shifted in her seat. Jessica herself went very still. "This particular structure," I said, my voice even and unhurried, "will need to be disclosed formally to our retail partner under the terms of their partnership agreement with the brand. We'll also need to restate the cap table in the due diligence documentation from the acquisition. Legal is already reviewing the timeline and the specific obligations." A brief silence. "Are there any questions about the financial structure as it currently stands?" I asked. Jessica's publicist started to say something. Jessica put a hand on her arm, stopping her. "No," Jessica said. Her voice was steady. "I'll give her that. No questions." Stokes nodded. "Good. We'll need the formal disclosure documentation by end of month." He looked at Jessica directly. "There will be no punitive action on the undisclosed investment provided the disclosure and correction happen within the window we've outlined. Apex's position is that the brand is strong and the path forward is clean. We want to keep it that way." Jessica nodded once. A small, tight movement. The meeting closed 20 minutes later. People gathered their things. Stokes took a call in the hallway. Marcus Webb excused himself. The publicist stepped out to make a call of her own, and for approximately 90 seconds, Jessica and I were the only two people left in that conference room. I did not plan what happened next. I want you to know that. There was no rehearsed line, no prepared speech, no moment I had imagined and executed. What happened was simply this. She looked at me across the table, and I looked at her. And somewhere in that looking was 11 years of shared mornings and arguments and Saturday errands, and a daughter who called me from a closet to make sure I was okay. "Darius," she said quietly. "Jessica, I didn't know you were going to be in this role." "I know," I said. "This is going to be complicated." "It doesn't have to be," I said. "If the work is done correctly, it will be straightforward. That is what I intend to do. The work correctly." She was quiet for a moment. Her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at me across a table at a fundraiser 14 years ago, bright and a little guarded, measuring. "I said something on that show," she started. "You don't have to." "I want to." She stopped. Started again. "I said something that was cruel. In public. And I've been telling myself it was honest, but I think, if I'm being truthful, I think I was scared. I think I needed to make you small enough that leaving felt reasonable." I sat with that for a moment. "You could have just told me you were unhappy," I said. "I know. You could have told me about Jordan. You could have told me a lot of things." She looked down at the table. "Yes. None of that is something we resolve in a conference room," I said, standing and gathering my folder. "But for whatever it is worth, Jessica, I never thought you were nobody. Not for one day of the 11 years we were together. I hope eventually you can say the same." I walked to the door. And then, because it was true and because I believe that the things that are true deserve to be said even when they are inconvenient, I stopped and turned back once. "The brand is genuinely good," I said. "What you built is real. I'm going to make sure it has the infrastructure it deserves. That's not personal. That's just the job." I left the conference room and did not look back. I want to pause here and be honest with you about something. The weeks between that conference room and what came next were not easy ones. I am not going to stand here, even in story form, and tell you that I handled every moment with perfect grace. There were evenings when I sat in the house that was being slowly emptied of her things and felt something that wasn't grief exactly, but lived next to grief and borrowed its furniture. There were nights I thought about the version of this where I had been angrier sooner. The version where I had raised my voice at some critical moment, made the fight external instead of internal, let her see exactly what that word had cost me when she said it. There is something almost seductive about that version. The release of it. The visibility. I chose the other version. Not because I am made of something stronger than other men. I chose it because I have a daughter who calls me from closets to check on me, and she is watching everything, and the version of her father she carries into her own adult life is being written right now in everything I do. That is not a small thing. It is, honestly, the only thing that kept the quieter version of me in charge during the moments when the louder version was pressing to take over. During those weeks, Theo came over on 2 separate Fridays. He brought food both times without asking and sat with me in the kitchen the way good friends sit with you, present without performance, not trying to fix the thing or explain the thing, but simply keeping you company inside it. One evening he said, You know what the hardest part of watching this from the outside is? What's that? How little credit you've given yourself this whole time, he said. You built that woman's foundation for 11 years. You covered her expenses, you believed in her when the blog had 40 readers, you moved your schedule around her launches, you were the quiet thing holding everything stable while she went loud. And somehow you've spent the last 2 months being measured about it. Measured is the only thing I know how to be, I said. I know, he said. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just naming it because I think you should hear that what you did for that family was real. Don't let anybody, including yourself, reduce it. I didn't say anything back, but I held on to that. The way you hold on to something small and true when the bigger story is still unsettled. The divorce proceedings moved forward through their stages. Attorneys and mediators and documents, and the specific bureaucracy of dismantling a shared life. Zoe's custody schedule was worked out with less conflict than I expected. Jessica, whatever else was true, loved our daughter. That had never been in question. What I did not expect was the phone call I received from Jordan Price. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks after the conference room meeting. A number I didn't have saved, but recognized from the documents Priya had shown me. I answered it. Mr. Cole, he said. He had a smooth voice, the kind trained in sales or charming rooms. I think we should talk. About what specifically? I asked. About the disclosure process. And about Jessica. A pause. I care about her. I want to make sure this doesn't damage what she's built. I was quiet for a moment. I recognized the dynamic. A man who had inserted himself into a situation he hadn't fully thought through, now realizing that the situation had weight and edges he hadn't accounted for. Mr. Price, I said, the disclosure process is a legal and financial matter being handled through the correct channels. It will proceed as it proceeds. Jessica has competent legal counsel. Another pause. As for caring about her, that's between the two of you. It has nothing to do with my role. You don't have any feelings about this? He asked. None at all. It was the kind of question designed to provoke, to make me perform either bitterness or false indifference. I gave him neither. I have many feelings about many things, Mr. Price, I said. I keep them separate from my professional decisions because that is how serious work gets done. I'd suggest you do the same. I ended the call. Then I sat at my desk for 5 quiet minutes and let myself feel what I actually felt, which was not the clean, controlled thing I had just performed on the phone, but something older and more complicated, something closer to the feeling you get when you realize that a story you thought you were the center of had been going on around you for longer than you knew. That feeling, I let myself sit in it, fully, without trying to move through it too quickly. Then I opened the next document and went back to work. But before that Wednesday, I need to tell you about the night before it, because what happened in those quiet hours shaped everything about how I walked into that meeting. Jessica called me, not her attorney, not a formal request through channels. She called my personal cell at 8:40 in the evening, a number she still had, and I had not changed, and when her name appeared on my screen I sat with it through 2 rings before I answered. Darius. Her voice was quiet, no professional coding on it. The voice she used when Zoe was sick in the middle of the night and she was scared. The voice from the early years when she was afraid something in the business wasn't working and she didn't want to say it out loud because saying it made it more real. I heard through Bria that there's a meeting tomorrow, that it's significant. Publicists talk. That was not a surprise. There is a meeting tomorrow, I said. Are you going to be there? Yes. A long pause. Long enough that I could hear her breathing. Long enough that I thought about the particular sound of someone gathering themselves before a sentence that cost them something. Are you okay? She said. And it was such a disarming thing to ask, such a fundamentally human thing when the professional terrain between us had been so carefully managed that I actually had to take a moment before I answered. I'm managing, I said. That's not the same as okay. No, I said. It's not. Another silence. But different from the silences we had carried through the final years of our marriage. Less defended. Less strategic. More like the silence of 2 people who have finally stopped pretending the room isn't heavy. I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything, she said. You can ask, I said. I can't promise anything about what I'm able to give. But you can ask. Just, she started. Stopped. Tried again. Just remember that there are people in that building who showed up every single day because they believed in something. Whatever happens tomorrow, they don't deserve to be the casualties of us. I had thought about that already. I had thought about it many times in the weeks leading up to this. The 31 people who came to work at by Jessica every morning. People who had dedicated real time and real talent to something they cared about, who had nothing to do with what had happened between Jessica and me and the choices that had brought us all to where we were. I know that, I said. I have always known that. A pause. The kind that means something is coming. Darius, she said softly. I'm sorry. Not for the cameras. Not because of what it's costing us professionally now. I'm sorry because what I said was wrong. Because you were never nobody. You were always the most substantial person in every room we were ever in together. And I think somewhere inside me I felt that, and it scared me. And I made it your fault instead of just being honest about being afraid. I sat very still in the kitchen. The good dishes still in the cabinet above the stove. That is the most honest thing you have said to me in 3 years, I said quietly. I know, she said. I appreciate it, I said. And I meant it. Without condition, without keeping score, I genuinely meant it. Get some rest before tomorrow. Whatever happens in that meeting, you're going to need to be clear. She said good night. I said good night. I sat in the kitchen for a while after the call ended, not analyzing it or filing it under any particular category of my feelings, just letting it settle into its right size. It was not reconciliation. One honest phone call after 11 years of accumulated distance and one very public wound does not rewrite anything. But it was real. And real, by that point, was the thing I valued above almost everything else. It was a Wednesday. Overcast morning, the kind that stays gray all day without committing to rain. I had been in the role for 11 weeks. The financial restructuring was substantially underway. The disclosure documentation had been submitted. The retail partnership had been notified and had, after a tense 2-week period of review, elected to maintain the partnership with amended terms. The Jordan Price stake had been formally redeemed through a structured buyout at fair market value. By Jessica was financially cleaner than it had been in 2 years. There was one remaining item. Raymond Stokes had called me the previous Friday. The conversation had been direct. The integration audit is complete, he said. And based on the financial findings and the governance review, we have made a decision about the brand's leadership structure going forward. A brief pause. We are restructuring the executive team. The founder will retain her role as creative director and brand ambassador. She will no longer serve as CEO. We need someone with operational and financial experience to run the business unit. We want that to be an internal appointment. I'm not the right person to run the business unit, I said immediately. The conflict of interest. The conflict of interest in the CFO role is manageable because of how clearly you've maintained professional separation, Stokes said. The CEO role is different. I agree with you. We are not asking you to take the role. A pause. We are asking you to handle the transition conversation. As Group CFO, it falls to you to communicate the structural change to the current leadership. I sat with that for a full day before I agreed. Not because I didn't understand the assignment. Because I needed to be certain I could do it the right way. For the right reasons. Without the wound in me being the thing driving my hands. On Wednesday morning, I drove to the By Jessica offices. Parked in the lot I had been parking in for 11 weeks. Walked through the lobby where the receptionist, a young woman named Dana who greeted me every morning with the same bright smile, said good morning without knowing this morning was different from any other. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Jessica's office was at the end of the main hallway, a corner room with a glass wall facing the open studio floor. She was already in. I could see her through the glass, head down over her desk, writing something by hand the way she always had, the old habit of drafting ideas in notebooks before they went anywhere digital. I knocked once. She looked up. Her expression moved through several things in the space of a breath. Then she composed herself and said, "Come in." I came in, closed the door quietly. I sat down in the chair across from her desk without being invited to. We were past that kind of formality. I have something I need to communicate to you on behalf of Apex leadership, I said. I want to do it directly rather than through attorneys or formal channels because I think you deserve that. Whatever else is true between us. She put her pen down. She folded her hands. Her eyes were steady. Whatever she had been expecting from this period of her life, whatever version of the story she had written for herself, I could see her reading the room and understanding that this moment was something specific. Apex has made a structural decision about the brand's leadership, I said. Effective the 1st of next month, the business unit will move to a new CEO. You will retain your role as creative director and brand face with full creative authority over content, and the lifestyle direction of the brand. The room was very still. "They're removing me as CEO?" she said. Not a question. "Yes." A long pause. She looked past me for a moment, out through the glass wall at the studio floor where her team was moving through their morning routines. People who had come to work every day because they believed in something she had built. When she looked back at me, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with happiness. "Is this you?" she asked quietly. "Is this your decision?" "No," I said. "This is Apex's decision based on the governance review." I communicated my opposition to being the person having this conversation. They disagreed. I am here because they asked me to be, and because I thought it was better coming from someone who knows you than from a letter. She was quiet. "Jessica," I said, "the brand is strong. Your creative vision is what makes it what it is. That is not changing. Apex is not trying to take by Jessica from you. They are trying to give it the structure it needs to keep growing. The CEO role, the financial operations, the governance, that's not where your value lives, and I think somewhere you know that." She looked at me for a long moment. "You could have made this ugly," she said. "Yes," I said. "You didn't." "No." Another long quiet. The kind that has texture to it. History and regret, and something that was not forgiveness yet, but might be moving in that direction slowly. "Darius," she said. "What I said on that show. You don't need to keep apologizing for it." I said. "I understood it the second time. You were afraid. You made me small because the alternative was admitting something you weren't ready to admit." I paused. "I'm not holding it over you. Not personally. Not professionally. I just needed you to know that it landed. And that I kept working anyway." She looked down at her desk. The notebook she'd been writing in. The pen she'd put down. "Nobody builds something this real on their own," she said, half to herself. I kept telling myself I did. But I didn't. "No," I said simply. "You didn't. But what you built is still yours. Don't let the correction become a reason to doubt that." I stood up. "There will be formal communication from Apex Legal today," I said. "Read it carefully. Your attorney should review the transition terms." I moved toward the door. "The team out there respects you. What happens next with them is still largely up to how you handle this." I put my hand on the door. "Darius." Her voice was different now. Something in it that I hadn't heard in a long time. Not the television voice, not the CEO voice, not even the voice she used when she was managing a difficult conversation. Something smaller. Older. The voice from the coffee shop 14 years ago. "Did you ever stop?" She stopped. Thought better of it. Shook her head slightly. "Never mind." I looked at her across that office one last time. "No," I said, answering the question she hadn't finished asking, because I knew what it was. "Because after 11 years you know." "No, I didn't." Then I left. 3 months after that Wednesday morning, on a Saturday in early September, I took Zoe to the park near our neighborhood. She was in a phase where she preferred walking to swings, which felt like a milestone I hadn't quite braced for. This small person who used to demand to be pushed higher and higher now walking beside me with her hands in her pockets, telling me about a book she was reading, something about a girl who discovers she can talk to birds. Does she use the power for good or bad? I asked. Zoe considered this very seriously. She uses it for complicated, she said. I laughed. Genuinely, from the chest, the kind of laugh that clears something. Complicated is usually the most honest option, I said. She nodded, satisfied. We kept walking. Theo was coming for dinner later. Priya had sent a message that week about a particularly satisfying quarterly earnings projection for the By Jessica brand under its new structure. She had added one line at the bottom. You would have been proud of how the team responded. I thought you should know. I had written back 2 words. Thank you. The new CEO of By Jessica was a woman named Sandra Gaines, 41 years old, 15 years of brand management experience, sharp and fair-minded, and exactly the kind of operational leader the company needed. She and Jessica had a difficult first 3 weeks and a functional 4th week, and what Priya described as a genuinely productive 5th. The brand's content output had not slowed. The retail partnership was expanding into 2 new markets. Whatever Jessica was building, she was still building it. Different now, more supported now, on a foundation that might actually hold the weight of where it was going. As for Jordan Price, he was no longer in the picture in any professional capacity. What happened in her personal life was her business and not mine, and I made a decision early in this process that I was not going to spend any of my energy on it. Some stories you have to let go of at the door, or they follow you into every room. The one thing I did do, and I mention it here because I think it matters, was call Priya into my office 2 weeks after the transition and tell her that her title was being formally elevated to VP of Finance, and that her compensation was being adjusted to reflect what her work had actually been worth for the past 4 years. She received the news the way she received most things, with that particular quiet that is the signature of a person who has been steady so long they have almost stopped expecting to be noticed. She looked at the document I slid across the desk. Then she looked at me. "Thank you, Mr. Cole," she said. "Thank you, Priya," I said back. People who do the right thing in hard circumstances deserve to be thanked out loud. She nodded once, gathered the document, and went back to work. That is the version of justice I believe in. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that requires a crowd and a camera and a moment for the record. The kind where the people who showed up with integrity walk away seen. The kind where the ledger, at the end of things, actually balances. The divorce finalized on a Thursday in August. I signed the last papers in my attorney's office, shook hands, drove to Zoe's school to pick her up for a weekend I had been looking forward to for 6 weeks. She came running out of the building with her backpack bouncing and her braids flying, and the specific unguarded energy of a child who has not yet learned to arrive anywhere at less than full speed. She launched herself at me, and I caught her the way I always did, one arm sweeping her up, her weight familiar and right. "You okay, Beau?" she said into my shoulder. "Better now," I said. We drove home with the windows down. She talked the whole way. I listened to every word. That evening, I sat on the back porch after she fell asleep, the way I had sat on porches at every major turning point of my life, it seemed, with the city sounds low in the distance, and the night air warm, and the porch light casting its small yellow circle of ordinary light. I thought about what the last several months had cost, and what they had returned. The accounting of a life is not clean the way financial ledgers are. There is no column where grief balances out against clarity, no formula for what a marriage dissolving costs against what surviving it intact returns. But I know this much. I went into that period called nobody by the person who was supposed to know me best, and I came out of it knowing exactly who I was. Not because someone gave that back to me, not because the professional outcome vindicated me, not because she eventually acknowledged that what she said was wrong. I know who I am because I kept being it, even when it was invisible, even when it cost something, even when the easier thing would have been to be smaller or louder or meaner or anything other than exactly, steadily, deliberately myself. My father used to say something when I was young and frustrated by how slowly things moved, how long it seemed to take for the right thing to get recognized. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Son, the tree that grows slow grows strong. The one that comes up fast is the first one the storm takes." I thought about that on the porch that evening. The 11 years of mornings. The 6-hour flights. The book with no acknowledgement page. The note on the kitchen counter with 9 words on it. The green room. The word. I thought about all of it, and then I let it settle the way things settle when you stop fighting the weight of them. Heavy and real and part of you now, but not in charge of you. Not in front of you. Behind you, where the past belongs. Zoe's window light clicked off upstairs. The sound of the neighborhood at night settling into its familiar rhythms. I am Darius Cole. I am 43 years old. I build things. Systems. Foundations. The kind of structures that hold other things upright long after the people who commission them have moved on to whatever comes next. I was called nobody in front of 22 million people. I kept working anyway. And that, it turned out, was the only answer that ever actually mattered. If you have ever been made to feel invisible by someone who was supposed to see you most clearly, stay with that feeling for a moment before you do anything. Not because you deserved it, but because how you respond to being underestimated is the truest thing you will ever build. Tell me in the comments, has there ever been a moment someone tried to make you small and you chose to grow instead? I want to hear your story. Every line in this story comes from real human experience, real emotional truth, and the lived reality of people who chose dignity over retaliation. AI was used to enhance clarity and pacing, so these lessons about love, betrayal, self-worth, and quiet resilience could reach everyone who needed them.